Imagine a small, bustling neighborhood in Hyde Park, Massachusetts, where the air was thick with the scent of fresh bread from the local bakery and children's laughter echoed through the streets. It was here on nine it was here on July 29th, 1924, that Elizabeth Short was born. The third of five daughters in the Short family, the joy of her arrival was soon overshadowed by hardship. When Elizabeth was just 6 years old, her father, Cleo Short, abandoned the family, leaving her mother, Phoebe, to fend for herself and her five young daughters during the harshest years of the Great Depression. Life for the Short family was a daily struggle. Elizabeth, with her dark curly hair and piercing blue eyes, often retreated into a world of dreams to escape the grim reality of their poverty-stricken existence. She was a delicate child plagued by chronic bronchitis and severe asthma, which led to several operations on her lungs. Despite these challenges, Elizabeth's spirit remained unbroken, her dreams of a brighter future fueling her resilience. Fast forward to 1943. Elizabeth, now a young woman, longed for change and opportunity. The postcard from California sent by her estranged father, Cleo, offered just that. She hadn't seen him in over a decade, but the promise of reuniting with him and the lure of the Golden State were too tempting to resist. With a mix of hope and apprehension, Elizabeth boarded a train to California, her heart set on a fresh start. The journey was long, filled with hours of gazing out the window at the changing landscape, her mind painting pictures of the life that awaited her. Upon arrival, the reunion with her father was bittersweet. He was a stern and distant figure, and the relationship was strained from the outset. Yet, Elizabeth's dreams of becoming an actress were stronger than ever, and she was determined to make it in Hollywood no matter the obstacles. In the dazzling, sun-soaked city of Los Angeles, Elizabeth Short reinvented herself. Known for her striking beauty, porcelain skin, and dark hair, she quickly earned the nickname the Black Dahlia. She became a familiar face in the Hollywood nightlife scene, often seen in the company of aspiring actors, producers, and servicemen, drawn to her enigmatic charm. Elizabeth worked as a waitress to support herself, often frequenting the infamous Formosa Cafe, where she would serve drinks to Hollywood's elite while keeping one eye on the door, hoping for her big break. Despite her relentless pursuit, the roles she longed for remained elusive. Auditions led to rejection after rejection, but she never let go of her dream. Her resilience was admired by many, though it masked the loneliness and desperation she felt inside. Elizabeth's personal life was a series of fleeting romances, often with servicemen who were captivated by her beauty and mystery. She was engaged to Major Matthew Michael Gordon Jr., an Army Air Force officer who tragically died in a plane crash before they could marry. This loss was a devastating blow to Elizabeth, compounding her sense of loneliness and longing for stability. Friends described Elizabeth as a complex and multifaceted individual. She was charming and sociable, often seen laughing and dancing at Hollywood parties, yet there was an air of sadness about her, a vulnerability that drew people in but also kept them at a distance. Her letters to family and friends often spoke of her dreams and disappointments, painting a picture of a young woman caught between the harsh realities of life and the shimmering illusion of Hollywood fame. Elizabeth's story is one of dreams pursued and lost, of a young woman who sought the stars but found herself ensnared in the shadows of one of the most infamous and tragic mysteries of all time. Her life, marked by resilience and aspiration, remains as captivating as the unsolved murder that would forever immortalize her as the Black Dahlia. So that kind of just gives the background and her life up to the point where we're about ready to get into.
I really love this case. I hate it, but I love it.
I do too. Like, she really was a really beautiful woman.
She was just freaking stunning, just ethereal and gorgeous. And I actually didn't know all that much about her upbringing. So I'm glad that I learned all about that because I didn't know, especially about all the lung surgeries and stuff that
Mhm.
she had growing up. I didn't know anything about that. I did know about her dreams of becoming an actress and her hopes and aspirations. I did know about that. But I had no idea about her upbringing and how she lived as a child.
Especially in this case, her death becomes the main focus and everything else is forgotten almost. because almost every story or every podcast or every video that I've seen about her gives a little background.
Yeah, but this just makes her more into so much of a person. Because
Yeah.
you don't just see, oh, aspiring actress. You see this person who grew up really poor and then she's in Hollywood now. I'm going to make it. It lends credibility to the kind of person that she truly was, how much effort she truly was putting in.
And that's honestly why I wrote the story like this, because I wanted to make sure to focus on who she was as a person before. I'm pretty sure everybody already knows what happened to her, but she was more than that. And that's what my point was, is that she was a lot more than what people thought, or at least people remember. But now we'll get into it. Picture a crisp January morning in 1947, the sky clear and the air biting cold. Betty Bersinger, a young mother, was pushing her stroller along Norton Avenue in Leimert Park, Los Angeles, heading towards a nearby shoe repair shop. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of serene morning that made the city feel like a peaceful small town rather than the bustling metropolis it was. As Betty walked, her eyes caught sight of something unusual in a vacant lot. From a distance, it looked like a discarded mannequin, pale and oddly positioned. Curiosity piqued, she moved closer, but what she found was no mannequin. The sight was so horrific that Betty stumbled backward, her heart pounding, her mind struggling to comprehend the macabre scene before her. She had discovered the mutilated body of a young woman, later identified as Elizabeth Short. The scene was nothing short of a nightmare. Elizabeth's body had been severed at the waist, a clean, precise cut that suggested the killer had some medical knowledge. Her upper torso was positioned several inches from her lower half, her arms raised above her head in a grotesque parody of repose. The stark white of her skin contrasted sharply with the dark earth around her, making the scene even more surreal and haunting. Her face had been slashed from the corners of her mouth to her ears, creating a gruesome Glasgow smile. The slashes were deep and meticulous, further indicating the killer's methodical approach. Her body had been drained of blood, and there was no signs of a struggle at the scene, suggesting she had been killed elsewhere and her body transported to the desolate lot. The attention to detail was chilling. Her body had been carefully cleaned and posed as if the killer wanted her to be found, to send a message. The meticulousness of the crime suggested a calculated mind, one that took pleasure in the brutality inflicted on Elizabeth. It was a tableau of horror that would etch itself into the minds of everyone involved in the case. The discovery of Elizabeth's bodies triggered an immediate and extensive investigation by the Los Angeles Police Department. Detectives swarmed the crime scene, combing every inch for clues. The media descended as well, and the story of the Black Dahlia quickly became front page news, capturing the horrified fascination of the public. The LAPD's investigation was exhaustive. They interviewed hundreds of people, from friends and acquaintances of Elizabeth to known criminals and anyone with even a tenuous connection to her. The sheer volume of tips and leads was overwhelming. Detectives shifted through countless false confessions, outlandish theories, and dead ends. Despite the intense effort, concrete evidence was elusive. The meticulous nature of the crime scene left little in the way of forensic evidence. Fingerprinting was in its infancy, and DNA analysis was decades away. The investigation hit one roadblock after another. Witnesses who might have seen something were unreliable, and many potential leads evaporated under scrutiny. As days turned into weeks, the case began to grow cold. The initial flurry of activity and hope gave way to frustration and despair. The haunting image of Elizabeth Short's mutilated body remained, but the answers to who killed her and why seemed to drift further out of reach. The media frenzy didn't help. Sensationalist headlines and wild speculations muddied the waters, and the pressure on the LAPD mounted. Each new theory and suspect brought hope, but time and again they were met with disappointment. In the end, Elizabeth Short's murder became a tragic symbol of the dark underbelly of post-war Los Angeles, a city of dreams where nightmares also thrived. The Black Dahlia case remains one of the most infamous unsolved murders in American history, a grim reminder of the evil that can lurk behind even the most beautiful facades. So yeah, this is the part of the story where a lot of people know her murder. the details, and then the investigation, which really didn't go anywhere. There was hundreds of suspects. We'll get into three of them for sure. Three of the most likely. One of them is really the most likely, but we'll get into all that.
It's hard to believe before how people solved crimes. We had DNA evidence and even necessarily like fingerprinting because that was new back then.
Exactly.
It's just really difficult to think about because you could pretty much get away with just about anything back then if you think about it.
And it really happened a lot. How many people didn't get arrested or the wrong people got arrested? Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of that. People getting arrested and charged, convicted of crimes that they didn't commit. It's bad now, but it was even worse back then.
But yeah, there's like literally no proof of anything. They didn't really have evidence at that point.
So let's now get into the suspects.
Here we go.
Suspect 1, Leslie Dillon. Leslie Dillon was an unlikely suspect in the high profile Black Dahlia case, a bellhop by trade and an inspiring writer by passion. Dillon was a man with a keen interest in crime, not just the headlines, but the intricate details of criminal behavior and psychology. His fascination with the macabre drew him into the orbit of one of the most brutal and perplexing murders in Los Angeles history. In late 1948, the LAPD received a letter that would thrust Leslie Dillon into the heart of the investigation. The letter was addressed to Dr. J. Paul DeRiver, the department's psychiatrist and expert on sexual psychopaths. Dillon, writing from Florida, inquired about the details of the Black Dahlia case, claiming he was doing research for a book. He expressed a deep interest in the psychology of the killer and posed questions that hinted at an unsettling familiarity with the crime. Dillon's letter was not the rambling of a curious bystander, but a calculated piece that included precise details only someone with intimate knowledge of the crime could possess. His questions about the surgical precision used to sever Elizabeth Short's body, the specific position of the corpse, and the nature of her facial wounds sent chills down the spines of investigators. How could a bellhop from Florida know so much about a murder that had baffled seasoned detectives? The LAPD wasted no time in tracking down Dillon. They arranged for him to meet with Dr. DeRiver in Las Vegas under the pretense of continuing the discussion about his book. This ruse allowed detectives to apprehend Dillon without arousing his suspicion. Dillon was brought to Los Angeles where the interrogation began in earnest. For hours, detectives grilled him, delving into his background, his movements, and his obsession with the Black Dahlia case. Dillon's calm demeanor and articulate responses only deepened the mystery. He seemed to know too much, yet he maintained his innocence, insisting that his knowledge came solely from his interest in crime and his discussions with DeRiver. As the questioning continued, Dillon revealed even more unsettling details about the crime, details that had never been made public. He described the types of knots used to bind Elizabeth Short's body and speculated on the psychological profile of the killer with uncanny accuracy. His insights were eerily spot on, leading detectives to wonder if they were dealing with the killer himself or just a man with extraordinary and morbid curiosity. Despite his intense interrogation and mounting suspicion, the case against Leslie Dillon began to unravel. Evidence, while suggestive, was circumstantial. There was no witnesses who could place him at the crime scene, no physical evidence linking him to the murder, and Dillon had a solid alibi for the time of Elizabeth Short's death. Moreover, the LAPD's handling of Dillon raised ethical questions. He was held without formal charges, subjected to intense psychological pressure, and denied legal representation for an extended period. When word of his detention and the methods used to extract a confession leaked to the press, public outcry forced the LAPD to release him. Leslie Dillon walked free, but the shadow of suspicion never entirely left him. He returned to Florida, his dreams of becoming a writer now overshadowed by the notoriety of being linked to one of the most infamous murders in American history. Dillon's intimate knowledge of the Black Dahlia case remained a haunting enigma. Was he brilliant, if twisted, amateur sleuth, or was he something far more sinister? The case against Leslie Dillon remains one of the many puzzling aspects of the Black Dahlia investigation. His story, filled with intrigue and unanswered questions, continues to captivate those who seek to unravel the mystery of Elizabeth Short's brutal death. Though he was never charged, the specter of suspicion clings to Dillon's name, a chilling reminder of how close the truth might have been. This is why I put him first. I don't really necessarily believe that he's the suspect or he's the killer, just because he's a lot like us, curious about these cases.
He does, at the same time, he had some guilt knowledge in there.
Yeah, but you can understand this was the time back when the LAPD was corrupt. So it's not really unheard of that these details that they thought were unreleased were leaked to the public somehow.
That's fair. But I do understand the fascination aspect. Look at us right now.
Yeah.
Like, if you looked at my Google history, people would be like, what is actually wrong with you? When in reality, I'm just trying to put together some true crime podcast episodes. Okay. That's all I'm trying to do.
If our search history ever gets looked at, we're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, it's gonna look really bad at first, but then they're gonna be like, "Oh, you're just insane. That's fine. That's fine." But I get it, but at the same time, there was at least a little tiny bit of guilt knowledge there, and to an extent, he did put himself into the investigation, which is like a perpetrator kind of thing to do.
Yeah, it is.
I'm not saying it was him, but to an extent, that is like a guilty thing that people like to do.
Oh, after I get done with the last two, you're going to agree that this is the least likely of the three suspects.
I had a feeling because you like to rank them least likely to
Mhm.
most likely. That's just your mo. So I'm going to grade you this time.
Fine, I'll let you grade me.
I'm going on a color scale.
That seems weird, but perfectly logical for you.
That is how my brain works. Thank you. The color scale that you get for this one, you get like a mustard yellow on this one.
My favorite color. I'll take it.
We'll see what others you come up with.
Suspect 2, Mark Hansen. In the glamorous and gritty world of 1940s Hollywood, few figures were as enigmatic and influential as Mark Hansen. A suave and sophisticated nightclub owner, Hansen was deeply embedded in the entertainment industry. His establishment, the Florentine Gardens, was a hotspot for celebrities and aspiring starlets alike. It was a place where dreams were born and sometimes shattered. Among the many young women who frequented his club, one stood out for her beauty and tragic destiny, Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia. Elizabeth Short, with her dark hair and striking looks, captivated many in Hollywood, and Mark Hansen was no exception. She stayed at his home on several occasions, seeking refuge in the chaotic whirlwind of her pursuit of fame. Hansen's home, located in the heart of Hollywood, was a sanctuary for struggling actresses, a place where they could rest their heads and hope for a break in the industry. Hansen's relationship with Elizabeth was complex. Some described him as a benefactor, a man who offered shelter and support to a young woman far from home. Others whispered of a more intimate connection, one tinged with unfulfilled desires and dimmer intentions. Elizabeth's belongings found in Hansen's home after her death added a layer of mystery to their relationship. What secrets did they share in those late night conversations in his mansion? Mark Hansen was not just a nightclub owner. He was a man with deep connections to Hollywood's darker side. His ties to the criminal world were an open secret. He rubbed shoulders with mobsters and dealt with the shady figures who lurked in the shadows of the entertainment industry. These connections made him a person of interest when Elizabeth Short's mutilated body was discovered. Theories abounded. Some suggested that Hansen, with his powerful connections, might have orchestrated Elizabeth's murder, or at the very least, had knowledge of it. The brutality of the crime and the careful positioning of her body hinted at a killer who wanted to send a message, a modus operandi not familiar to those acquainted with the criminal underworld. The LAPD turned their spotlight on Hansen, probing into his life and his interactions with Elizabeth. They questioned him extensively, trying to piece together the last days of her life. Hansen's demeanor was calm and cooperative, yet there was an air of evasiveness that detectives couldn't ignore. He admitted that Elizabeth had stayed at his home and that he knew her well, but he vehemently denied any involvement in her murder. Despite the intense scrutiny, the evidence against Hansen was circumstantial. Yes, Elizabeth had stayed with him, and yes, some of her belongings were found in his home, but there were no concrete proof linking him to the gruesome crime. The LAPD faced a familiar frustration, strong suspicions, but insufficient evidence. Mark Hansen continued his life in Hollywood, his name forever linked to one of the most infamous murders in the city's history. The whispers never fully died down, and his reputation remained tainted by the association. In the court of public opinion, he was a man who might have known more than he let on. A man who kept the secrets of the Black Dahlia locked away in the shadows of his glamorous world. Mark Hansen's involvement in the Black Dahlia case remains a tantalizing mystery. Was he a benefactor caught in the crossfire of a horrific crime? Or was he a sinister figure with deeper ties to Elizabeth Short's tragic end? His connections to both Hollywood's elite and its underworld cast a long, dark shadow over the investigation. Hansen was never formally charged, and he lived out his days as a successful nightclub owner. Yet the questions linger. His name etched into the annals of true crime history serve as a reminder of the enigmatic and often perilous paths that intertwine in the pursuit of fame and fortune in Hollywood. The truth about his relationship with Elizabeth Short may never fully be known, but his story remains an integral part of the Black Dahlia's dark legacy. So, I know what you're thinking, that this sounds a lot better than the first one.
No, actually, that's not what I was thinking. I was thinking he sounds a lot closer to her than the first one. However, what I'm thinking is that this guy does not sound like he has the skills to do what was done to her body. Oh, Matt has a thought.
Oh no, you're hitting the nail on the head right there.
Yeah, I think it's possible that he had somebody else do it, but if this was some sort of mob or mobster related crime of some sort, that's just not their MO.
No, and that's what some people thought, maybe that his connections were the reason she was killed, because there was a lot of speculation that he really had feelings for her. She wasn't the only one that he let stay in his house.
Right.
I think he's definitely a little bit of a stronger suspect than Leslie Dillon, just because he actually knew her.
You can actually put them together in the same room. Her belongings were at his mansion or his house or whatever. You can actually put those two together and it tracks, and I get that. But at the same time, I don't know if I necessarily buy him as the killer, specifically because I just don't know if he would be able to wise her up. I just don't know if he would have that ability. Does he have that ability? He's a nightclub owner or whatever.
Yep,
He's not a surgeon. He's not even like a butcher or something, would have some sort of knife ability, but he doesn't have that background. So where would that be coming from?
exactly. Which is why the top suspect is a doctor.
Excellent. I love it. Let's hear it. Wait. I have to grade you. This one, you're getting like a mud brown on this one.
My favorite color.
It's not your favorite.
It is. All my clothes are mud brown. You just don't know. You don't even.
I've never seen you consistently wear mud brown.
Maybe that's because you're not a true friend. Maybe you just don't know me.
Whatever. I've known you for years.
Suspect number 3, Dr. George Hodel. In the glamorous yet shadowy world of 1940s Los Angeles, few figures were as unsettling as Dr. George Hodel. A wealthy and influential physician, Hodel's connections spanned the social elite of Hollywood, making him a fixture at lavish parties and exclusive gatherings. His intelligence and charisma were undeniable, but beneath the polished exterior lurked a darkness that would eventually lead his own son to believe he was the Black Dahlia killer. The story of Dr. George Hodel's connection to the Black Dahlia murder truly began decades later with Steve Hodel. His son, Steve, a retired LAPD detective, had grown up with an unsettling sense about his father. After George Hodel's death in 1999, Steve began sifting through his father's belongings, uncovering a trove of disturbing evidence. Among these were cryptic journal entries and photographs that hinted at a deeper, more sinister aspect of his father's life. One photograph in particular caught Steve's attention, a haunting image of a young woman who bore an uncanny resemblance to Elizabeth Short. But it wasn't just the photographs that raised red flags. Steve's training and instincts as a detective kicked in, leading him to scrutinize every piece of his father's past with a critical eye. The deeper Steve delved, the more disturbing the connection became. He found that in 1950, the LAPD had bugged George Hodel's home as part of an investigation into another crime. The recordings from those bugs revealed chilling snippets of conversation. In one, George Hodel could be heard saying, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They can't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's dead. This statement, recorded in Hodel's own voice, was damning. It seemed to be a tacit admission of guilt, and yet George Hodel was never charged. The complexities of the case, combined with Hodel's powerful connections, appeared to protect him from prosecution. Steve's investigation didn't stop there. He enlisted the help of a cadaver dog trained to detect human decomposition and brought it to the basement of his father's home. The dog alerted to the presence of human remains, suggesting that something terrible had once occurred in that house. This discovery added another layer of suspicion, implying that George Hodel might have used his own home to carry out these gruesome deeds. George Hodel's flight to Asia in the 1950s only deepened the mystery. He lived in the Philippines for several years, avoiding further scrutiny from American authorities. This sudden departure, coupled with the mounting evidence, painted a picture of a man with much to hide. George Hodel's life was a bizarre blend of brilliance and depravity. He was a man who rubbed shoulders with the rich and famous, yet his private life was marred by accusations of abuse, including a scandalous trial where he was accused of SAN his own daughter, Tamar Hodel. Although acquitted, the trial added to the aura of menace surrounding him. Despite the compelling evidence and the damning recordings, George Hodel was never formally charged with Elizabeth Short's murder. He died a free man, leaving behind a legacy of suspicion and unanswered questions. Steve Hodel's investigation has kept his father in the spotlight, adding a chilling chapter to the already dark saga of the Black Dahlia. George Hodel remains one of the most compelling suspects in the Black Dahlia case. His life, shrouded in mystery and marked by darkness, continued to captivate and horrify those who seek to uncover the truth behind Elizabeth Short's brutal murder. I think you can't get any more clear than that.
It is fairly clear. I like that one. That I do, because obviously as a doctor, he is going to have some experience. It's going to make a lot more sense, but like motive. Aside from being a crazy person,
He was definitely a piece of crap. He went to trial for molesting his daughter.
obviously. I
Uh,
just wish that we knew a better motive. Did we know for sure if he actually knew her?
it's inconclusive. The picture that he had that was possibly Elizabeth Short, yeah, we can't actually prove it. But to me, the most damning evidence is that recording that they had.
Yeah, the wiretap.
Mm. And it's worth noting that it was suspected that George Hodel had paid off and bribed officers and even prosecutors, which is why possibly he wasn't ever charged. Because to me, that's almost a confession.
Yeah, it's pretty dang close.
We don't really have a motive as far as possibly that he may have been romantically tied to Elizabeth Short, or at least wanted to be.
Definitely possible.
We just don't know. I think he still is definitely the most likely suspect, and there's just too much evidence pointing to that direction.
No, I would agree with you. I would agree. I just wish that we knew some sort of motive aside from the fact that if he's some sort of serial killer or something along
Right.
those lines, then we don't know because
And
they do what they do.
that honestly is one of the theories that he is a serial killer because the cadaver dog got hits at the basement, and it also got hits on the outside of the property. At the time that the cadaver dog went there, his son didn't own the property, it was someone else did. So he couldn't actually dig on the property and he could never get a warrant. And that's a lot of the speculation is that obviously it was a well-known secret that the LAPD was very corrupt back then.
Oh, for sure.
They're speculating that the LAPD didn't want him to investigate and bring their corruption on the forefront, especially a high profile case like that. So he was never able to get a warrant. And obviously, by the time he'd start doing all this, he was retired. So he couldn't actually get a warrant, anyways. And he could never get another detective to follow up on it, basically.
Fair.
So yeah, he was a LAPD detective, retired, but he still was not able to get the LAPD to actually investigate further. Everything that we found out basically was from him doing his own investigation.
Which honestly, good for him.
Now, now obviously he was not close with his father,
I would hope not, honestly, at that point.
but it's still his father. So the fact that he calls him out and says that he possibly could be a murderer, that really says a lot to me. Because I don't know if I hated my father, I still don't know if I'd accuse him of being a murderer.
I think I could, just because you can see things differently. You can
Yeah,
have somebody that's blood, but you can still call them out for what they are.
yeah, but at the end of the day, it still would be hard because it would be
Oh, it would be hard, absolutely, but I think it's still something that if it's that big of a deal, I think it's something that you would have to do morally.
so, obviously, he has the training to do this, to do the crime. He's a doctor, very successful doctor at that. So, he definitely is by far the best suspect, I think. And honestly, I really do think that he's the one who actually did this crime. I don't know why. There's a lot of speculation on his motive, but he definitely has the means. He basically has the confession. They had hits of decomposition on his property. Now, could that be something else unrelated or could it be someone else?
Oh, it absolutely could.
So that doesn't necessarily, for me, it doesn't, that's not really compelling evidence. It paints a picture. To me, it's the kind of confession and the fact that he did have the training and the knowledge to do.
Oh, yeah. It's circumstantial, but it's there.
Yeah. So by far, he is definitely, and all three of these guys, I think, the top suspects, but I think he by far is the number one suspect.
I would agree with you. Fine. My grade for you on this one is like a sage green.
Ooh, my favorite color.